Captain Jake Morrison stood at the large window of Luna Station, watching the worst gift humanity had ever received. The alien ships had just delivered what they called military aid, but what looked more like a floating junkyard. Broken metal plates drifted slowly through space while robotic arms tried to gather them into some kind of order. Each piece looked older than human civilization itself. Admiral Lisa Carter walked up beside him and shook her head. Her face showed the same disgust that Jake felt in his stomach. They had both been part of the 60-year struggle to join the Galactic Council. 60 long years of proving that humans were not the wild animals that most aliens believed them to be. 60 years of diplomatic meetings and cultural exchanges and trade agreements that barely gave humanity a voice in galactic affairs, and now this was their reward. The Zephyrian ambassador stood behind them talking to other human officials. His crystal-like face reflected the lights of the station in patterns that humans had learned, meant he was enjoying himself. Ambassador Keth had made it very clear during the ceremony that this was exactly what he expected to give to a species like humanity. "Your people should be grateful for this opportunity," Keth had said in his musical voice that somehow managed to sound condescending in any language. "These components represent centuries of galactic engineering knowledge. Surely they will serve as an excellent foundation for your species' first attempt at building a proper warship." Jake remembered how hard it had been not to punch the alien right in his glittering face. The components floating outside were indeed old. Some of the hull plates showed burn marks from battles that happened before humans had even invented gunpowder. The power cores came from mining ships that had been scrapped decades ago. The weapons were so outdated that most species used them as museum displays to show their children how primitive their ancestors had been. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez was already down in the cargo bay with his team trying to make sense of what they had received. His first report over the comm system had been filled with words that Jake was glad the alien ambassador could not understand. The inventory list read like a joke that was not funny. "Sir, we have fusion reactors from at least 6 different manufacturers," Danny reported. "Half of them use power coupling systems that went out of style before I was born. The armor plating comes in 12 different alloy compositions, and none of them were designed to work together. And the weapon systems require ammunition that nobody has made for 30 years. Lieutenant Commander Beth Williams was trying to make tactical sense of the mess. She had pulled up holographic displays showing all the components and how they might fit together. The result looked like a puzzle where half the pieces came from different boxes. "Captain, the targeting computers speak 3 different programming languages," Beth said. "The sensor arrays are designed for different types of ships with different power requirements. And the life support systems are sized for crews that breathe different atmospheric mixtures." Jake nodded as he listened to each report. The Galactic Council had made their intentions very clear without saying it directly. They would provide humanity with the materials needed to build one warship as promised in the membership agreement. But those materials would be chosen to ensure that humanity could never build anything that might threaten the established order of things. It was a test designed for failure wrapped in the appearance of generous assistance. The other council races had done this before with newer members. Give them outdated equipment that could never work properly together, and then point to the inevitable failure as proof that the new species was not ready for full participation in galactic affairs. It was a way to keep newcomers in their place while still honoring the letter of membership agreements. The Corvin delegate had been even more direct than the Zephyrian. "Perhaps in a few centuries your engineers will develop the skills necessary to make proper use of these gifts," he had said. "Until then, you should be content to learn from your betters." But as Jake stared out at the floating collection of discarded technology, he was not thinking about failure. Human engineers had built functional spacecraft from spare parts and duct tape. Human mechanics had kept impossible machines running long past their design limits through pure stubbornness and creative problem-solving. Human inventors had looked at every limitation and found it to be just another engineering challenge waiting to be solved. The aliens had given them scrap because they expected humans to see scrap. They expected humanity to try building a conventional warship using conventional methods and to fail when the incompatible systems refused to work together properly. They expected frustration and surrender and a request for better components that would never be granted. What they had not expected was for humans to look at incompatibility and see opportunity. Jake turned away from the window and activated his personal communicator. "Get me Commander Rick Hayes from Research and Development," he told his aide. And contact Dr. Amy Foster at the Fusion Laboratory. Tell them both to pack everything they need for an extended assignment. We have work to do." Admiral Carter looked at him with the first smile he had seen from her in weeks. "Jake, what are you thinking?" "I am thinking that these aliens have just given us the chance to build something that nobody in the galaxy has ever seen before," Jake replied. "They expect us to fail because we received components that do not work together. But what if we do not try to make them work together the way they were originally designed? What if we build something completely new?" The word spread quickly through human space over the next few days. The Galactic Council had delivered their insult disguised as assistance. But instead of the expected defeat, they had accidentally provided humanity with the raw materials for the greatest engineering project in human history. Engineers and scientists began arriving. At the construction yards orbiting Earth, each one brought their own ideas about how to turn limitations into advantages. Each one saw the pile of incompatible components as a challenge that could be solved with enough creativity and determination. The aliens had given them scrap, expecting them to build failure. Instead, they were about to witness the birth of something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. 6 months later, the construction yards around Earth looked like controlled chaos. Commander Rick Hayes stood in the middle of the main assembly bay, watching his team of engineers work on something that had never existed before in the galaxy. What should have been a simple task of putting together standard components had become the most ambitious engineering project humanity had ever attempted. The skeletal framework of the ship hung in zero gravity, looking nothing like any vessel the Galactic Council had ever built. Where council ships were smooth and elegant, this one had sharp angles and irregular surfaces. Where council ships followed established design principles, this one seemed to ignore every rule that had been written about how starships should look. Hayes walked over to a group of visiting human politicians who had come to see what their tax money was building. Most of them looked confused by what they saw. The ship did not look like the sleek warships they had seen in council propaganda videos. "The beautiful thing about having incompatible systems is that incompatibility forces you to think differently," Hayes explained to the group. "Other species see 3 different power standards and think they have a problem. We look at 3 different power standards and see backup systems that work on completely different principles." He pointed to the power core assembly where Dr. Amy Foster was working with her team. Instead of trying to make the old fusion reactors work the way they were originally designed, she had connected them together in a cascade system that actually produced more power than any of them could generate alone. Dr. Foster realized something that the Council species never considered. Hayes continued. "They think newer technology is always better than older technology. But older technology has something that newer technology does not have. It has been tested under real conditions for decades. It has proven that it can work when everything goes wrong. The fusion reactors that had been salvaged from old mining ships were indeed ancient by galactic standards, but they had run continuously for 50 years in the harsh conditions of asteroid mining operations. They had been repaired and rebuilt and upgraded so many times that they were actually more reliable than the newer models that Council species preferred. Foster had linked them together so that when one reactor produced more power than needed, the excess energy would boost the output of the next reactor in the chain. The result was a power system that became more efficient as it was, pushed harder instead of less efficient like normal systems. Lieutenant Commander Beth Williams had solved the targeting computer problem in a way that made Hayes proud to be human. Instead of trying to make the ancient computers work like modern systems, she had networked them together to create something entirely new. Each computer handles a different part of the targeting calculation, Williams explained to the visitors. This one tracks the target movement. This one calculates the weapon trajectory. This one predicts where the target will be when the weapon arrives. They pass information to each other in a continuous loop that gets more accurate the longer it runs. The result was a targeting system that could handle multiple enemies simultaneously while learning from each shot it fired. Council ships used single powerful computers that could be overwhelmed or damaged. The human ship used dozens of simple computers that backed each other up automatically. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez had perhaps the most creative solution to their material problems. Instead of trying to make smooth armor plating like other species used, he had deliberately left gaps and rough surfaces that would confuse enemy sensors. Council ships are designed to look impressive, Rodriguez told his engineering team. They want their armor to be perfect and shiny and uniform. But perfect armor creates predictable reflection patterns that enemy targeting systems can use to find weak points. The human armor plating looked rough and random, but it had been carefully designed using chaos mathematics. Enemy sensors would have trouble getting consistent readings because the reflection patterns changed depending on the angle of observation. What looked like sloppy construction was actually sophisticated camouflage built into the ship structure itself. Captain Jake Morrison visited the construction site every day, watching the progress with growing excitement. The ship that was taking shape before his eyes was not just different from Council vessels. It was the opposite of everything the Council thought a warship should be, where Council ships relied on standardized components. The human ship used modified parts that had been pushed beyond their original specifications. Where Council ships followed predictable design patterns, the human ship incorporated randomness into its basic structure. Where Council ships used expensive materials, the human ship used cheap salvage that had been cleverly repurposed. The other species in the Alliance had begun sending scout ships to observe the construction. Their crews must have been filing very confused reports because the ship did not fit into any known category of vessel. It was not a battleship or a cruiser or a destroyer. It was something completely new. Ambassador Keth from the Zephyrian delegation had requested permission to tour the construction site several times. Each request had been politely declined by human officials who explained that the facility was restricted for security reasons. The truth was that they did not want the aliens to understand what they were building until it was too late to stop them. Hayes knew that word of their progress was spreading through diplomatic channels. The Council species were beginning to realize that humanity had not failed as expected. Instead, they had taken the insult of receiving technological garbage and turned it into an opportunity to innovate beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. The ship was more than just a collection of modified components. It was a declaration that humanity would not be limited by what others thought they deserved. Every system had been rebuilt from scratch. Every component had been pushed beyond its design limits. Every assumption about how things should work had been challenged and discarded. As Hayes watched his team install the final power couplings, he realized that they had accomplished something remarkable. They had not just built a warship from scrap materials. They had built a completely new kind of warship that operated according to principles that no other species had ever considered. The aliens had given them garbage expecting failure. Instead, they had provided the raw materials for a revolution in military technology that would change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Soon it would be time for the first test flight. The USS Defiance launched on a cold Tuesday morning, with its irregular hull reflecting sunlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez had insisted on the rough surface finish that scattered light and sensor beams in unpredictable directions. The ship looked like nothing else in human space, and certainly nothing like the sleek vessels that Council species preferred to build. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center surrounded by displays that would have confused any alien naval officer. Human interfaces showed probability calculations and chaos pattern analysis, instead of the clean, standardized readouts that other species used. The bridge looked more like a research laboratory than a military command post. Admiral Lisa Carter had come aboard for the maiden voyage along with several other human officials who wanted to see their investment in action. They all tried to look confident, but Morrison could see the nervousness in their faces. This was the moment that would prove whether human ingenuity had created something revolutionary or just an expensive pile of junk that happened to fly. All systems showing optimal performance across all 3 power grids, reported Danny Rodriguez from his engineering station. The multiple redundant power systems were one of the innovations that made other engineers shake their heads in disbelief. Most ships used one primary power source with backup systems that only activated during emergencies. The Defiance used 3 different power sources simultaneously with automatic load balancing that actually improved efficiency. The shakedown. Crews took them toward the edge of human territory where long-range sensors had detected suspicious activity near the shipping lanes. Hegemony raiders had been attacking merchant vessels in the area for weeks, and Council patrols had been unable to stop them. The Hegemony was not part of the Galactic Council, but they used standard Council technology and tactics in their military operations. Their ships were fast and well-armed, and their crews were experienced in hit-and-run attacks against lightly defended targets. They had been operating in this region for months without any effective opposition. Contact on long-range sensors, reported Lieutenant Commander Beth Williams from her tactical station. 5 ships in standard hegemony raider configuration. They are running a wolfpack formation and appear to be moving to intercept a merchant convoy. Morrison settled into his command chair, feeling the slight vibration that indicated the ship. Systems were automatically adjusting for combat operations. The Defiance had been designed to adapt its performance based on current conditions, without requiring manual input from the crew. It was another innovation that Council engineers considered unnecessarily complicated. "They probably think we are just another Council patrol ship," Williams continued. "Standard hegemony doctrine calls for hit-and-run attacks against isolated vessels. They will expect us to call for backup and wait for reinforcements before engaging." The 5 raider ships had arranged themselves in a classic attack formation, designed to overwhelm single targets through coordinated fire from multiple directions. It was a tactic that worked well against Council vessels that relied on standardized defensive systems and predictable maneuvering patterns. "Williams, I want a firing solution that uses all 3 targeting networks simultaneously," Morrison ordered. "Show them something they have never seen before." The distributed targeting system began analyzing the enemy formation, using computational methods that no other species had ever developed. Each of the networked computers handled different aspects of the tactical problem while sharing information in real time. The result was a firing solution that took into account variables that single computer systems could never process quickly enough. The engagement began when the lead hegemony ship opened fire, expecting to face return fire from standard Council weapons with predictable performance characteristics. Instead, they found themselves facing weapons that fired from unexpected angles with accuracy that seemed impossible for a single ship to achieve. The Defiance maneuvered in patterns that violated everything the raiders knew about space combat. Council ships moved in straight lines or gentle curves that could be predicted and countered. The human ship moved in chaotic patterns that seemed random, but were actually calculated to maximize defensive advantages while maintaining optimal firing positions. The first raider was disabled within 20 seconds by weapons fire that came from directions the enemy had not expected. The second raider attempted to close range for a killing shot but found that the human ship could somehow track multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining accurate fire on all of them. The remaining 3 raiders tried to retreat, but discovered that the human ship was faster and more maneuverable than anything they had encountered before. The modified engines that human engineers had built from salvaged components produced more thrust and used less fuel than the expensive systems that Council species installed in their vessels. 43 seconds after the first shot was fired, the engagement was over. 2 hegemony ships had been completely disabled and were drifting dead in space. 3 more had suffered critical damage to their engines and weapons systems. None of the raiders had managed to inflict any significant damage on the Defiance. "Sir, all enemy vessels are neutralized," Williams reported with excitement that she was trying to keep out of her voice. "Our systems performed better than projected specifications. The targeting network actually improved its accuracy during the engagement by learning from each shot fired." Morrison nodded, but his attention was already focused on the long-range communication systems. Word of this engagement would spread quickly through both Council and non-Council space. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had built something that changed all the rules of space warfare. "Danny, how did our systems handle the combat stress?" Morrison asked over the comm system. "Captain, the reactor cascade actually became more efficient under combat loads," Rodriguez replied from engineering. "Dr. Foster was right about the power systems becoming more stable when pushed to higher output levels. We are showing better performance now than we did during the initial system tests." Admiral Carter walked over to Morrison with a smile that he had not seen since before the aliens had delivered their insulting gift of technological garbage. "Jake, I think we just announced to the galaxy that humanity is no longer the species that can be safely ignored." The USS Defiance continued toward its patrol route with systems that had proven themselves in actual combat. Behind them, the disabled hegemony ships were broadcasting warnings about a ghost ship that did not follow any known tactical principles. The reputation of the most feared warship in the galaxy had begun, 6 months after the first engagement with hegemony raiders, the USS Defiance had become a legend throughout the galaxy. Stories spread from system to system about the human ship that appeared without warning and vanished before anyone could understand what had happened. Pirates fled at the first detection of its chaotic energy signature. Even legitimate military forces changed course to avoid crossing paths with the mysterious vessel. Admiral Lisa Carter stood in the main briefing room at Luna Station, addressing a gathering of human military leaders and government officials. Behind her, a holographic display showed the expanding influence of the Defiance across known space. Red zones that had been controlled by raiders were now green. Trade routes that had been too dangerous for merchant shipping were operating normally again. Border disputes that had simmered for years had been resolved through the simple threat of human intervention. The Zephyrian ambassador requested a private meeting last week, Carter reported to the assembled group. Not through official diplomatic channels, but through backdoor communications that he thought we would not detect. He wants to discuss what he calls mutual interests and shared concerns about galactic stability. The change in alien attitudes had been remarkable to observe. The same species that had given humanity technological garbage while expecting them to fail were now treating human representatives with something approaching respect. 3 other council races had made similar informal contact attempts. In the past month alone, Captain Jake Morrison participated in the briefing through quantum communication from the Defiant's current position near the Outer Rim territories. His image appeared as a 3-dimensional hologram that made it seem like he was sitting at the conference table instead of being hundreds of light years away. Admiral, we are seeing behavioral changes and potential threats before we even have direct contact with them, Morrison reported. Yesterday, a Corvan battle group with 15 ships altered course to avoid our patrol route when their long-range sensors detected our approach. They had overwhelming numerical superiority, but chose not to test their capabilities against ours. The psychological impact of the Defiance had exceeded every projection that human analysts had made. Enemy forces were making tactical decisions based on rumors and speculation, rather than actual intelligence about human capabilities. The unknown had become more powerful than any weapon system. Within human space, the success of the Defiance had triggered a renaissance of innovative engineering that was transforming the entire military-industrial complex. Shipyards that had struggled to build vessels meeting basic Galactic Council standards were now experimenting with hybrid technologies and adaptive system designs that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Dr. Amy Foster had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy for her work on cascade fusion reactions and adaptive power distribution systems. Her research papers were being studied by alien engineers whose species had been building starships since before humans had developed agriculture. Universities on dozens of worlds were requesting copies of her theoretical work on power system optimization. The interesting discovery we have made, Foster explained to the briefing through her own holographic connection from the research laboratories on Earth, is that our supposedly primitive approach to engineering has opened up possibilities that more advanced species never considered. They have been so focused on achieving technical perfection that they forgot about the advantages of adaptability and resilience. Commander Rick Hayes had taken the lessons learned from building the Defiance and applied them to designing a new generation of human vessels. Construction had already begun on 3 more ships using similar principles, but with improvements based on combat experience and system performance data. We are not just building individual ships anymore, Hayes told the gathering. We are creating technological ecosystems where each vessel is designed to learn from its operational experience and become more effective over time. The ships literally get better at their jobs the longer they are in service. The tactical innovations developed by Lieutenant Commander Beth Williams had been studied and copied by military academies throughout human space. Her manual on adaptive combat doctrine was being translated into dozens of languages by species that were trying to understand how humans approached space warfare so differently from established methods. When you operate a ship that breaks conventional rules, you cannot think like everyone else thinks. Williams had written, traditional tactics assume that all vessels will behave according to predictable patterns. When your ship does not follow those patterns, the enemy tactical systems become confused and start making mistakes that you can exploit, but Perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed humanity as a whole. The galaxy no longer saw humans as the primitive newcomers who were struggling to catch up with more advanced civilizations. They had become the unknown factor that could not be predicted or contained within established frameworks of understanding. Intelligence reports from across Council space indicated that military planners were having to completely revise their strategic assessments. The possibility of human intervention had become a variable that affected every major political and military calculation in the galaxy. The Corvan hegemony had reportedly recalled several battle fleets from forward positions to defend their home territories against the possibility of human retaliation for their previous raiding activities. The Zephyrian military was conducting war games that included scenarios involving combat against vessels using human technological approaches. Even species that had never had any direct contact with humanity were adjusting their military doctrines based on reports of what the Defiance could accomplish in battle. The psychological impact was spreading far beyond the regions where the ship had actually operated. Captain Morrison concluded his portion of the briefing with an observation that made everyone in the room smile. "Sir, the most remarkable thing we have discovered is that our ship continues to exceed its own performance specifications. Every engagement teaches the system something new about optimal operation. We are literally flying a vessel that becomes more dangerous the more it is used in combat." The briefing ended with Admiral Carter summarizing the strategic situation that humanity now found itself in. The Galactic Council had given them scrap expecting humiliation and failure. Instead, they had accidentally provided the raw materials for a technological revolution that was reshaping the balance of power throughout known space. The USS Defiance continued its patrol missions with a crew that had proven human engineering could accomplish impossible things. Behind them, they left a galaxy that was learning to fear and respect the species that had turned garbage into the most effective warship anyone had ever seen. The legend was still growing. 18 months after its first combat mission, the USS Defiance faced the ultimate test when the Corvan hegemony launched a massive invasion of Council space. 57 Corvan battleships supported by hundreds of smaller vessels crossed the neutral zone in a coordinated assault that caught the Galactic Council completely unprepared for war on such a scale. The Council response was exactly what anyone who understood galactic politics would have expected. Emergency sessions were called to debate proper procedures. Defense committees met to discuss appropriate protocols. Formal requests for military assistance were filed through official channels and processed according to established bureaucratic guidelines. While they argued and debated, 3 Council worlds fell to Corvan occupation forces. Captain Jake Morrison received the priority transmission from Admiral Lisa Carter while the Defiance was conducting routine patrol operations near the edge of human territory. The quantum communication system allowed real-time conversation across the vast distances of interstellar space, but the delay still made normal conversation feel awkward and formal. "Jake, the Galactic Council is asking for our help," Carter said with an expression that showed she understood the irony of the situation perfectly. Not demanding or commanding or expecting as they usually do, they are actually asking politely. The Zephyrian ambassador used the word "please" 3 times in his official request. The same alien species that had given humanity their technological garbage while expecting complete failure were now hoping that those discarded components had been transformed into something capable of stopping an invasion that their own advanced fleets could not handle. The political implications were obvious to everyone involved in the conversation. Morrison called his senior staff to the main briefing room where holographic displays showed the current tactical situation throughout Council space. Corvan battle groups were advancing on multiple fronts using standard hegemony tactics that had proven effective against Council forces for decades. Civilian populations were evacuating ahead of the invasion, while Council military units fell back in organized retreats. "Sir, this is exactly the scenario we designed our systems to handle," reported Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez after studying the enemy formation data. "Large numbers of conventional vessels using predictable tactics and standard equipment configurations. Our adaptive systems should be able to process threat assessment algorithms faster than their coordination protocols can adapt to changing conditions." Dr. Amy Foster had run computational Models of the engagement possibilities using current reactor performance data. The Cascade power systems are operating at peak efficiency levels, she reported through holographic communication from her laboratory on Earth. We can maintain full combat power output for extended engagement periods, which gives us capabilities that no other single vessel in the galaxy can match. Lieutenant Commander Beth Williams was more direct in her tactical assessment. Captain, our distributed targeting networks were specifically designed to handle massive numbers of simultaneous threats while learning optimal engagement patterns from each interaction. This is exactly the type of battle scenario that plays to our technological advantages. The final engagement took place in the Centauri system, where Corvan forces had concentrated for their assault on the Council Core worlds. 43 enemy vessels had arranged themselves in standard hegemony battle formation with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated maneuvering patterns that had overwhelmed every Council fleet they had previously encountered. The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace directly in the center of the enemy formation using navigation techniques that Council species considered impossible. The human ship appeared where no vessel should have been able to emerge from faster than light travel without colliding with other objects in normal space. What followed became known throughout Council space as the Battle of Centauri. Though human, naval historians preferred to call it the Centauri demonstration. For 47 minutes, a single human warship engaged an entire Corvan invasion fleet using tactics and technologies that violated every established principle of space warfare. The Defiance maneuvered through the enemy formation like it was dancing rather than fighting. The ship moved in patterns that seemed to anticipate where enemy fire would be aimed before the Corvan gunners had even selected their targets. Human weapons fired from angles that should not have been possible, while defensive systems absorbed incoming fire that should have been overwhelming. The distributed processing networks turned the enemy numerical superiority into a disadvantage as Corvan ships began interfering with each other, targeting solutions. The adaptive combat systems learned from each enemy attack pattern and developed countermeasures faster than the Corvan tactical computers could process new instructions. Morrison watched the tactical displays with growing amazement as his ship performed beyond every specification that human engineers had projected. The vessel was not just fighting according to its programming, but was actually developing new combat techniques during the engagement itself. Sir, the targeting networks are showing performance improvements in real time, reported Williams with excitement that she was no longer trying to hide. The systems are learning from enemy behavior patterns and adapting our response algorithms automatically. We are getting better at fighting them the longer this battle continues. When the engagement finally ended, 38 Corvan ships had been disabled or destroyed. The remaining 5 vessels had done something that no hegemony force had ever done in recorded history. They surrendered rather than fight to the death as their military traditions demanded. The aftermath of the battle was swift and decisive. Corvan forces throughout Council space began withdrawing to their own territory within hours of receiving reports from the surviving ships. The invasion was over and Council worlds were safe because a single human vessel had proven that hegemony military superiority was an illusion. 3 days later, the Galactic Council formally voted to grant humanity full membership with all the rights and responsibilities that such status included. The vote was unanimous, with even the Zephyrian delegation supporting the measure despite their previous attitudes toward human capabilities. Admiral Carter responded to the Council invitation with diplomatic language that was polite but unmistakably clear about humanity's new position in galactic affairs. We appreciate the Council recognition of human contributions to galactic security and look forward to continuing our role as innovative problem solvers in whatever challenges may arise in the future. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance as it resumed patrol duties in the now peaceful shipping lanes. Construction of additional human warships was already underway, using lessons learned from their first venture into galactic military technology. Each new vessel would build upon the innovations that had turned alien garbage into the foundation for a new kind of naval power. The aliens had given them scrap expecting failure and humiliation. Instead, humanity had built something that would ensure galactic freedom for generations to come.